Eden. I will be refuting Nahum's major claim. It is that the increase of guns will lead to mass murders. I will refute his speech by first denying his examples through better sources. Next, I will show his second claim diminishes the reasoning of his argument, and then how his third claim is not sufficient enough to support his major claim. His first claim is that the restrictions of guns lead to violence. I will prove this is not the case by contradicting his examples. The first evidence of his first claim is that Holland has the highest murder rate. He got this information from an article that is dated from 2007. To counter this, I found an article from the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, and it says the highest murder rate is Venezuela. Thus, this example is wrong and outdated. Second, Nahum states that the gun offenses in Wales rose from 1999 to 2009. He uses this information to show how restricting guns cause more gun issues. But if you look at the gun control archives, the numbers drop from about 16,000 in 1999 to about 12,000 in 2009 in Wales. Again, this example is incorrect. The third part of his claim, for his first claim, states that Vermont has the lowest murder rate, but is pro-gun. This may be true, and the low murder rate shows that you might feel safe in this state, but would you feel safe in a place with no restrictions? In the state, anyone can buy a gun, no background check, no permit needed. The fact brings up the question of the type of restrictions you need, which is unanswered in the opponent's argument. His major claim is, again, the act of restricting guns will cause more mass murders. But his second claim is that restricting guns cannot stop mass murders. He does not give any correlation here on how this X causes Y, but how Y is really out of our hands. Y being that mass murders cannot be controlled. The strategy does not support his claim. His first piece of evidence here demonstrates how it is easy to get guns, and this goes along with the Paris attack he references. He tells how the extremists involved in this attack obtained their weapons easily, but does not mention that they may have gotten their weapons because they're in an area that does not have gun restrictions. The fact that these extremists got the weapons is because they're outside of Paris, and the fact that the mass murder wasn't by someone in Paris shows how the restrictions of Paris are working for the most part. So this is contradictory. His second example for this claim is not stated in his speech, but in his outline he references the Sandy Hook and Colorado theater shootings, and how these men shot freely because those states were gun-free zones. This goes against his argument because if these places were not gun-free zones, then maybe there would have been opposition to these shootings. Again, these claims in this section do not support his major claim. The act of restricting guns causes mass murders, and these examples become contradictory. His final claim is that criminals will always find guns. Now, that may be true, bad people do bad things. However, does this prove that the restrictions on guns cause mass murders? No, this argument is not sufficient. He lists the ways you can illegally obtain guns by stealing, buying from street dealers, and buying from home dealers. This all may be common knowledge and is probably true for the most part. However, if the restrictions were tighter on guns, then street dealers would be stopped, and the guns wouldn't be for sale, so there would be no guns to steal. Thus, more restrictions would improve illegal ways of getting guns. This third claim has to do with the people themselves and their actions, not the restrictions on guns or their cause of mass murders. Overall, Nahum's argument is interesting. I was convinced by the facts in his speech while he presented it, but further investigation caused me to think otherwise. I appreciated his inclusion of Sandy Hook and the Paris attack. However, his support was contradicting his argument. And then finally, I am aware that bad people do bad things, but I do not agree that that has anything to do with the fact that gun restrictions cause mass murders. Thank you.
All right, structurally identify the proposition and you kind of preview what your responses are going to be. You signpost the secondary issues as you get to them, and I thought the first phrasing in the original speech was a little bit confusing, and that your response to it is also a little bit confusing. The essence of the argument really is that restrictions are counterproductive. That's the argument that the advocate's making, that these restrictions on gun ownership have a counterproductive relationship that's going on here. So I think that whole point needed to be simplified by both the advocate and by the refutation speech. Your challenge on whether Holland or Venezuela has the highest murder rates or levels of violence, I'm not exactly sure what that gets us. I assume that the reason that the advocate brought up Holland is because they have a high murder rate and have strong gun control, so as a consequence that shows that there's no relationship. The fact that Venezuela also has a high murder rate without the concomitant explanation of what their gun issues are, it doesn't really help very much. So I think that that you kind of responded to the point here, but not with anything that affects the generalization that's being made. The next argument seems to imply that there are places where there are some restrictions and they have been effective, and I think that that's the way you need to phrase that claim. I think it's Wales that you were making this comparison on, but I didn't really get a clear explanation about what rules they instituted in 1999 that changed this. But that's the argument I think that applies here, and you just need to make it a little bit more as a declarative counterclaim on that particular point. The Vermont issue, your response is kind of a hypothetical visualization. I'm not sure that that's what the advocate suggested, that there not be any background checks or any positions, but there, I think that might be a place for argument that it's not clear what is an acceptable restriction, what's an unacceptable restriction. The advocate doesn't really identify those issues, and so the grounds for both sides are a little bit problematic there. Maybe that would be a way to go with that. On the second point, you kind of talk about the Paris example. The advocate used that as an illustration. You've kind of made this inference here that they obtained the weapons outside of Paris, so that must show that the rules in Paris were. I'm not exactly sure that that's the inference that you want to draw from this. I think that there needs to be a clarification of what the laws are, if they are distinct from the general French laws, something that's going on in Paris. Otherwise, this argument is just, I think you're making an inference from a false premise that the law is somehow different outside of Paris, and I don't know that that's the case. The gun-free zone argument was a little bit confusing. I'm not sure that the advocate proved that gun-free zones increase the likelihood of shootings, but I didn't really understand your response to that particular point. On the third point, basically I think you were arguing that there's insufficiency of proof on the advocate's argument, and I thought that the general challenge there was okay. But there's also an assumption that says if we put in restrictions that they would work, but I didn't see any demonstration of that. So in essence, that's, I think, kind of the same argument that we had up above, where we're talking about what goes on in Wales and how effective these restrictions might be in other places. Well, if you can give us some examples of where the restrictions have made a difference, then I think we've got some basis for comparison. But otherwise, I'm not sure we do. At the end of the speech, I think you kind of engage in a little bit more of an evaluation than you do a refutation, and that's not really the function of this presentation, so don't worry about doing that. Just indicate what is flawed about their argument. All right, thank you.